I got tagged by Fontrodden for this RPG tag video thing, so I figured, hey, why don't I just make an opportunity out of this and actually make an actual video talking about my experiences with RPGs and that sort of thing, because why not? So, first question, let's see here. I'm a bit unorganized. First game I ever played as an RPG would be actually D&D 4th edition. Now, the funny thing about that is I still have the 4th edition books. I wasn't a fan of 4th edition about, a year or two after I got into it, but it was a good starting point. I admit, it was definitely a good starting point at the time for D&D if you wanted to get into role-playing games. 4th edition wasn't really a bad place to start. After a while I learned that I didn't like it, but it was actually really interesting to start digging, because I would always love digging through the books and finding little rules and things. One of my favorite books that I bought for 4th edition was The Adventurer's Vault, which had a whole bunch of magic items, and it had rules for vehicles, which is something I really like in RPGs. I like doing vehicle stuff occasionally if it fits with the setup. So like having vehicle chases and or traveling across an overworld with like this awesome ship or airship or vehicle that you have, which is something I did in. It's just something I'm doing in one of my campaigns, which is really fun. So that was the first game I played. It was good as a starting point, and I think a few of the other things on this list will talk about that game, my experience in 4th edition, so we'll hear a little bit more about that. My first character, I'm trying to remember his name now. Don't remember his name exactly anymore. I used to remember his name. I think I still have the character sheet somewhere around here, like in one of my bags or my archives or something. I know he was a Dragonborn paladin, and I liked, one of the things I liked about 4th edition was the races they added. Say what you want, I really thought Eladrin and Dragonborn were cool as heck, and I'm so happy they started putting that stuff back into 5e. I am such a big fan of those races. A Dragonborn in particular, because I love having a breath weapon. It's something you don't normally get to do. You're like, wizard, what do you do? I cast a spell. Fighter, what do you do? I hit him with a sword. Dragonborn fighter, what do you do? Oh, I breathe fire on him, and then I run up, and it's so cool that you can just have a character who can just casually spew out something from their mouth. It's a really cool character feature. If you have races and characters that can do really cool stuff like that, those are the kind of races that I like to play. You have winged races that can fly. Some DMs might not be okay with that sort of thing, but I really like those sort of races that give you this sort of variety with what you can do, and very interesting, fun things you can do with your character, like spewing I've seen another. I played along with another Dragonborn who was like a black scale Dragonborn, and they had acid breath or acid spit. And I'm like, that's cool. That's kind of neat. There's so much you could do with that. It's so interesting. So I played a Dragonborn paladin. I remember we had all these issues with him where it was like, oh, you accidentally murdered some people who were corrupted, but you still feel bad about killing them because they were people, or something. Or even the goblins that I killed, I felt bad about. It was, I don't know, it was something. I remember, I accidentally killed some kind of foe that I wasn't meant to, hurt. And I had this whole crisis of faith, and I had to redeem myself as a paladin. I don't remember a lot of it because it was so long ago. It was several years ago. I don't remember now. My favorite system right now, I think, is a tie between Numenera and Fate, which technically I could do together, which would be kind of fun. I really like the Fate system because of how flexible it is, but it is kind of hard to run because you have to keep track of all these aspects. If your players aren't really responsible, which mine sometimes aren't. You have to keep track of a lot of aspects and like different features in the environment. And since I'm doing that online, it's kind of hard to do that even if you have a map. Cause it's like, oh, well, I want to use this, so and this comes in here, and oh, what about this? The characters are simple, but sometimes they can get really complicated if you have a lot of things going on and multiple characters, like in a lot of my games. Oh, multiple characters. Whereas with Numenera, you have a very simple, okay, well, this thing is level 5, so you have to get I think that would be a 15 in order to actually, like, do anything about it. I really like that system because as a DM, I don't need to roll dice. I just need to prepare what I want to prepare in terms of a story and just let it go and have the players all just roll their dice and see where that goes. But I like playing both, and I have, let's see if I can get it. I have my own set of Fate dice that I really like using. And these are really fun to use because like you just roll them, and instead of having to roll like some kind of crazy d6, 4d6, and then counting which one is a success, these just give you like plus minus blank, so you know right away by looking at them like what you get, and it's really nice. So Fate is probably like my actual favorite system, but I'm having a lot of I'm having a harder time running it right now just because it's pretty hard to run with a large party, but I guess it just takes a lot more getting used to, and really I would say Numenera is like my other favorite system to run. I really like the Cypher system, and I'm looking forward to when they publish it as a standalone system because you could do a lot of things with that. Like I've tried to do superpowers in it, like superheroes and different things with the Cypher system that like you wouldn't think of just by looking at Numenera. Like it'd be really fun to run just like a basic sci-fi game with the Cypher system, not even like what Newman the Ninth World, just like sci-fi on like a spaceship or something. That might be kind of fun, doing stuff like that. My favorite character, I think right now, would go to Tristan Ellis, who was a Pathfinder character I played back when I was doing campaigns with my friend Carl. He basically said I could make any type of character, so I made like a fetchling who's like he's from the Shadow Plane, so he has like grayish skin, and he was a really cynical person. He reflected a lot of the darker side to my personality, and he was straight up like an evil character. So it was fun to go around, and I mean, I killed the antagonist of the campaign, but I also killed a lot of the NPCs that were helping us because I didn't like them. And I would be straight up with him. I'm like, I think this NPC is annoying. I'm just going to kill them. And like I felt like that in character too because we had a lot of the same like sensibilities. He sort of he was kind of a cool character because he was playing in sort of this high magic campaign, and compared to everyone else, he only had a few spells. Like he was a pretty low level witch character who only really did like minor hexes and would attack people with daggers. Like he was a really like cloak and dagger kind of character, and he was really interesting because he went through an arc like in the actual story where he murdered enough people to the point where he started to feel guilty about it, and then he wanted to actually try to redeem himself by the end of the campaign. And the campaign didn't end like we didn't actually get to finish it, but we did decide that like at some point that he would start a family. He would get back home because he was originally from the Shadow Plane. He got dumped into like this high fantasy world, and so he eventually just like was able to get back home and started a family with one of the characters that he had met along the way, and that sort of thing. So he settled down at some point. It was an interesting character to play because it was a character who was evil, but he didn't stay that way. Like he actually became guilty about what he had done, and he regretted a lot of the murders that he had committed. So let's see, next topic. Least favorite character. That's kind of a hard one. Because I like a bit about a lot of my characters. I have a really hard time picking a least favorite. I mean, least favorite in terms of how he played out would be my character, Lewis Christland. Because in the campaign that I'm playing now, he's sort of this character that was supposed to be sort of serious. And then I ended up playing him a bit too much because he's like a farmer who was turned into a battle mage. Like he got recruited into the army as a farmer and from being on a farm, and he is sort of seems a little bit like naive or foolish because he doesn't really know a lot about what's going on in the world because he was in the middle of the country and like thrown into this war, and that's pretty much all he knows. So, I mean, he was supposed to, and he also developed like this whole PTSD thing, but it was really like he was a character that I wanted to play seriously, but I ended up like having him goof off way too much and act kind of like a weird hick. That he ended up like none of the other characters in the party took him seriously, and like the entire campaign was like basically like mocking him. Hey, look, it's Lewis. You know, I really regret not playing him more seriously from like the beginning, and that's sort of why he's my least favorite character, because I really didn't like how I actually portrayed him, because it was really different than how I saw him in my head. In general, it was really like a terrible thing because like no one would take my character seriously, and he had a very serious story to him, and a lot of very serious things happened to him in the campaign, but nobody would like, everyone would like, literally at this point my party members are like, ha, yeah, look at him suffer, like he's, really funny when he's like, I'm like, no, he's going through a lot, like his family is getting like killed, basically his family is dying off, and his home village was destroyed by like demons, and he has like a lot of stuff going on with him, and my party members are just like laughing at his expense. It's kind of sad because he wasn't meant to be a comic relief character. I meant for him to be serious. He didn't really turn out that way, and it's sort of sad, and that's kind of the only reason why he's my least favorite character. Otherwise, I like playing him. My favorite world. Now that's kind of hard for me to answer. I guess because I don't really look into a lot of settings. I usually create my own settings. I don't really have an answer for that because I don't use a lot of pre-made settings, and I sort of just create the worlds that I'm in, and I don't really have a favorite world that I want to play in. It's just sort of random, whatever I end up doing. So my favorite world is pretty much anything as long as it's interesting, I guess would be the best answer. Let's see. Minis versus favorite die, right? I think favorite die would go back to these fate dice just because I have some other dice that I like, but I've been using these for quite some time, and these have become my default fate dice. So I like these the most out of all my dice, mostly just because I use it the most, and they aren't exactly lucky all the time. So they're not the best, they're not the luckiest dice in the world. But I mean, they're good enough and they work for what they need to do. Let's see. Yeah, Minis versus Theater of the Mind. I like Theater of the Mind a lot more, and I've been drifting very, very far away from doing anything related to using Minis, mostly because I don't have Minis, and most of my games are online. So, I almost completely use Theater of the Mind, and I have a funny story that has to do with a lot with abstract distances. Because I had this one instance in Fate where I had a whole bunch of elven archers firing across a field. And I had said before that the field, because in Fate you use sort of abstract distances, you don't really, exactly say, oh, this is, 50 whatever feet. So I regret doing that. I should have just said it was kind of a long field, because I said it was like about 100 miles long or something like that, some big number like that. It was like it's a long field to where the castle is that they were shooting at. So I was like, okay, well, these elven archers, they fire about 100 miles across the field and hit you, and they're like, how? You can't fire arrows that far. And I'm like, well, they're elves. They're really good at shooting. And he's like, no, that distance is kind of ridiculous. And I was like, man, I should have just said it, because I said originally that it was like, in Fate terms, that it's about 3 zones. And I figured they would be able to fire that far with longbows. Like 3 zones would make sense to me. So I was like, okay, so they should be able to fire across 3 zones if they have longbows and they are super accurate, sort of thing. And then the players were like, "What? That's ridiculous. They can't fire that far." And I'm like, "Well, in my head, it makes sense if we're using sort of like abstract." So I'm really bad with measurements. Also, is another trait that I have. So, like when I put out figures like 100 miles, it tends to get really skewed because I don't actually have a very good idea of how far that is. So I'll just like eyeball it and be like, "Well, this is about." So I really like doing abstract stuff as opposed to being very tactical and using minis or a grid. And I also like doing very abstract, creative fights, like in like Dream Space and stuff like that. So that you can't really do with minis because everything is just kind of everywhere at once. My favorite critical failures and successes. I actually can't remember any off the top of my bat. Off the top of the bat, I think the last session I played with Lewis was kind of fun because I have the Scorching Ray spell. So I can basically shoot out this beam of energy, and I'm a gun mage. And he has a gun because he's a gun mage. So he'll shoot this laser beam out of his gun. He's very high level at this point. I think he's like level 12 or something like that if it was Pathfinder. We're actually playing in Dungeon World, but like we're using a bit from Pathfinder. So I'm equivalently like about level 12. With all the different, like, I mixed classes. I'm like a part wizard, part, healer, part, so I have a lot of things going on with my character. But he basically got a crit success to shoot a laser beam at a dragon, which was really awesome because I shot it right toward his head, and his head just like blew off, and I'm like, yes. It's like one of the moments where I'm like, so what did you do? I shot a laser beam out of my gun at a dragon and exploded it. It's kind of the awesome moment that you have when you finish off an enemy, but you do it with a crit, so it's just the kind of best possible thing that you can do. Critical failures. I'm trying to remember what was one of the worst critical failure. I think was the Idris Bay game, where I failed to capture the lions, and then I ended up on the floor covered in crows, and I got my eye pecked out. I think there aren't really critical failures in that game, but that's probably the closest I've come to having like one of the worst critical failures I've ever had, where I just end up on the floor. I mean, it was considered a failure, but it was one of those things where I was like, okay, I have seriously screwed up now. I am on the floor getting pecked out, my eyes pecked out by crows, and I ended up with an eye patch by the end of that session. So that was kind of an extreme moment, but it was honestly one of my favorite failures that I've ever had, just because it was so fun for me to imagine just have it happening. My favorite class would definitely be the Arcane Trickster sort of archetype, which is what Lewis was, I believe. Or no. That was what Tristan was. He was sort of he was a witch rogue multiclass. And those are my favorite classes to have when you have like sort of a mix between this sort of trickster roguish character who can dart around really quickly and use magic at the same time. Like, those are my favorite characters because they're flexible enough in combat where they can still sort of fight, but they're not very strong to the point where you want to put them right in the front. So it works if you have a character who can like cast invisibility and sneak attack, like that sort of stuff. I like pulling tricks like that, on that sort of level. And that's my favorite archetype of character, sort of this rogue mage combination. and I always like that type of character. That's probably my favorite type of character. Systems or games that I want to play. I think the two that are at the top of my head right now, besides the World of Darkness game that I'm planning on running, which I wanted to play for a few years. Now that's happening, so I can't really count that. Are like superheroes, because I've always loved superheroes. I'm a big fan of comic books, so I really want to run some kind of superhero-esque game or play in one because I haven't really gotten the chance to do anything like that yet. Or like a magical girl type of game because I am a huge fan of Madoka Magica, so I wanted to run my own game based on that for a pretty long time, and I've been wanting to do that, but now this whole World of Darkness thing comes up. But Magical Girl one is the next thing I plan to do, so that's gonna be kind of fun to play out because it could be a lot of fun to do that sort of thing, even if it's kind of depressing. Like it's like, oh hey, you're these really pretty, little girls who have to go around and fight horrible monsters. Have fun. It's sort of neat. My real life, the closest thing to my real life class, I took a test. I think the closest class that I have that resembles who I am, I think, would be a sorcerer, because I'm sort of this like very I'm kind of shy, but like I have this sort of outward charisma when it comes to coming up with ideas and being creative. So I sort of have this a part of the sorcerer that's like this raw natural energy that you just hone and focus and then just release into the world, like that raw magical power. I really like sorcerers because they're not like wizards where they're like, oh, I want to study, because I like magic. But I'm not the studious type. I won't dig into a book and read it for hours. I'll skim. I skim. I'm not the type of person who's really into reading, honestly. So sorcerer really appeals to me, where it's like this sort of raw magic, and wild magic too also appeals to me as well. This sort of raw and focused wild energy that I like. Random chaos, that sort of thing. That's the kind of class that I really feel like exemplifies me. Also because the sorcerer is sort of, they're very independent in terms of, usually mages, you have the sort of, oh, I come from a mage college, I studied in my tower, and I am bound to the, you have elemental sorcerers, but really, like, they aren't really tied to they're not lawful as much as wizards are. I mean, wizards don't necessarily need to be lawful, but the principle is that usually they're very studious and they're very focused, and they have sort of an alignment towards like maybe a college or a guild, whereas sorcerers are a lot more independent most of the time, and they follow their own path, or they'll follow their own, and they usually will have a bloodline if it comes to something like Pathfinder, depending on what mythos you use. They'll have like, oh well, my great 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 grandfather made a deal with a dragon and has the powers of a dragon, and it was passed down to me, and now I do what I want with it. It's not like they're suddenly like, oh, I'm on assignment from the Mages Guild. No, they're doing the sort of thing they want to do because they have a lot more freedom and choice. They're more like the chaotic or neutral mages, whereas I see wizards as being more like lawful. Well, that's about all I needed to say. So I don't really have anyone I want to tag because I don't know that many people on YouTube. But I did want to just make a video talking about sort of some of my experiences and some of my upcoming things that I'm planning on doing. And hopefully, I think in a few days, I'm going to be doing my World of Darkness campaign. That should be up on my not Facebook page, my YouTube page. So you should be able to see that pretty soon. So look forward to that, I guess. And for now, I'll be signing off.